"I am not a prostitute," Aretha shouted. "I am forced by my father to do this." Billionaire Philip Reese studied the defiant girl before him, offered as payment for a gambling debt. Something in her unwavering gaze made him hesitate. That moment of mercy would change both their lives forever, setting them on a path toward justice, revenge, and unexpected love. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome to Mr. Peter Stories, where love, passion, and inspiration come alive. Before we dive into today's story, let's take a moment to pray together as one strong, united family. A powerful prayer for the Mr. Peter Stories family. Heavenly Father, the Almighty and Everlasting God, we come before you with hearts full of gratitude. Thank you for this beautiful family, for every soul listening right now, and for the love that binds us together. Lord, we ask for your divine presence to fill this space, to touch every heart, and to bring peace, joy, and blessings to all who hear this prayer. Father, you are our refuge, our protector, and our healer. We lift up every member of this family, those struggling in silence, those seeking direction, and those in need of a miracle. Let your light shine upon them, O Lord. Break every chain of doubt, fear, and worry. Replace their burdens with peace, their struggles with victory, and their sorrows with joy. We pray for Mr. Peter, the heart and soul of this family. Lord, strengthen him, renew his spirit, and restore his health. Let your healing hands touch his body, giving him the strength to continue his purpose. Bless Binta, his queen, with endless love, joy, and divine favor. Cover their daughter with grace and healing, surrounding her with your unshakable protection. Father, we declare that no weapon formed against this family shall prosper. No sickness, no hardship, no challenge will stand in the way of the blessings you have prepared for us. Open new doors of opportunity, pour out unexpected blessings, and let testimonies overflow in the lives of everyone listening right now. We rebuke negativity, we reject failure, and we declare victory over every situation. Let this platform continue to shine as a beacon of love, passion, and inspiration. May every story shared here touch hearts, transform lives, and bring hope to those who need it most. Lord, as we step into today's story, let it be more than just words. Let it be a message that stirs the soul, ignites the heart, and reminds us all of the beauty of love and destiny. We seal this prayer in the mighty name of Jesus. And the entire Mr. Peter Stories family says, Amen. Now, my beautiful family, let's take attendance. Are you here? Drop a present and blessed in the comments. Let's begin the story. Chapter 1. The Cruel Hand of Fate. The sound of gunshots echoed through 6-year-old Aretha Franklin's dreams for years after that rainy Tuesday evening. Sometimes, in the worst of the nightmares, she could still feel the warm spray of her father's blood across her cheek as the bullet tore through his chest. The robber had only wanted the day's earnings from her father's small convenience store. He got that, and a man's life in the bargain. Aretha sat motionless at her father's funeral, a tiny figure in black, her eyes dry not from lack of grief, but from its overwhelming presence. Her mother, Clarice, sobbed beside her, clutching Aretha's small hand so tightly it hurt. But Aretha welcomed the pain. It was the only thing that felt real. "Baby, we're going to be okay," Clarice whispered between sobs. Though even at 6, Aretha recognized the empty promise in her mother's words. They weren't okay. Not when the insurance money ran out 3 months later. Not when they moved from their modest but comfortable home to a 1-bedroom apartment in West Side Heights, where gunshots weren't just nightmares, but nightly occurrences. Not when Clarice took on 3 jobs and Aretha became acquainted with the hollow ache of being hungry more often than not, and especially not when Victor Chambers walked into their lives. He appeared like an answer to a desperate prayer Aretha had never prayed. Tall, with a smile that transformed his otherwise unremarkable face, Victor spotted Clarice serving tables at Denny's and was relentless in his pursuit. Aretha watched her mother transform under his attention, color returning to her cheeks, laughter to her voice. "He makes me feel alive again, Aretha," Clarice explained one night, her eyes shining with something other than tears for the first time in nearly a year. "Don't you want Mama to be happy?" Aretha did. So she swallowed her inexplicable unease when Victor moved into their cramped apartment 3 months later. She tried to return his smiles when he called her princess and brought her second-hand toys. She pretended not to notice when wine bottles began accumulating in the trash, or when her mother's laughter took on a brittle, artificial quality. The wedding was small, held at City Hall with only a bored clerk and Aretha as witnesses. Victor wore a suit that smelled of mothballs. Clarice wore a cream-colored dress and a tremulous smile. Aretha wore her Sunday best and a growing knot of dread in her stomach. That night, as Victor celebrated with friends in their living room, Aretha overheard a conversation that would haunt her for years. "You really hit the jackpot, Vic," a man with yellowed teeth said, clapping Victor on the shoulder. "Pretty wife, cute kid, and a regular paycheck to fund your poker games." Victor's laughter held an edge sharp enough to cut. "Playing the long game, Tommy. Playing the long game." That long game revealed itself over the next 10 years as Victor's true nature emerged from behind the carefully constructed facade. The charming smiles gave way to scowls, the pet names to slurred insults, the small gifts to pawned possessions. Clarice's paychecks disappeared into Victor's pockets, funding poker games and horse races, returning only as bruises when the cards or horses didn't cooperate. By 16, Aretha had become the de facto head of the household, working after school at a local diner, hiding money in the hollow base of her bedside lamp, and learning to treat her mother's injuries with supplies stolen from the school nurse's office. She'd grown into a striking young woman with her father's height and her mother's delicate features, a fact that didn't escape Victor's increasingly predatory gaze. "You're filling out nice, Aretha," he'd comment, eyes lingering as she moved around their cramped apartment. "Bet the boys at school can't keep their hands off you." Aretha learned to wear baggy clothes at home and to keep her bedroom door locked at night. She learned to recognize the different threat levels in Victor's drunkenness, the weepy melancholy that meant he'd lose at cards again, the simmering anger that preceded the nights her mother would wear long sleeves regardless of the weather, the cold calculation that meant he was plotting something worse than usual. The apartment became a minefield of triggers and tensions. On good days, when Victor won at the track or scored a temporary job, they lived like a parody of a normal family. He'd bring home Chinese takeout and call Clarice baby instead of bitch. He'd ask Aretha about school and seem to genuinely care about her answers. These glimpses of what might have been only made the inevitable return to reality more painful. On bad days, and there were increasingly more bad days than good, Victor would disappear for stretches of time, returning with strangers who eyed their meager possessions with calculating stares. Men with thick necks and thinly veiled threats, who'd pull Victor aside for private conversations that always left him pale and shaking. "Just business associates," he'd explain to Clarice, who had long since stopped asking questions that might earn her a backhand across the face. But Aretha asked questions. She listened at doors and rifled through Victor's pockets when he passed out on the couch. She learned about markers and VIG and loan sharks with names like Tiny and Brick. She pieced together the extent of Victor's gambling debts, tens of thousands of dollars owed to people who didn't send late notices in the mail, but enforcers to break kneecaps. It was after one such business associate visit, when Aretha was 17, that she first caught one of Victor's friends looking at her with something other than casual disregard. Your daughter's growing up real nice, Vic, the man commented, his gaze crawling over Aretha like physical touch. Real nice. Victor's eyes narrowed, not with protective anger, but with speculative interest, as if seeing merchandise rather than a stepdaughter. Yeah, she is at that. That night, Aretha overheard Victor on the phone, his voice low and urgent. Look, I need more time. No, I understand that, but what if I had something else to offer? Something worth more than money? The silence that followed was deafening. My stepdaughter, Victor finally said. She's 17, looks 21, virgin too, guaranteed, worth at least $50,000 to the right buyer. Aretha's blood turned to ice in her veins. She'd known Victor was capable of many terrible things. But this was monstrous beyond comprehension. With trembling hands, she packed a small bag that night, planning to flee to her friend Melissa's house until she could figure out a more permanent escape. But as she crept toward the front door at 3 a.m., Clarice's coughing stopped her. Her mother's health had been deteriorating for months, undiagnosed illness compounded by stress and malnutrition. Leaving meant abandoning Clarice to Victor's mercies, or lack thereof. With a defeated sigh, Aretha returned the bag to its hiding place under her bed. She would find another way. She had to. For 3 months, Aretha walked a precarious tightrope. She picked up extra shifts at the diner, saving every penny. She researched shelters and assistance programs that might help both her and her increasingly frail mother escape. She rebuffed Victor's attempts to introduce her to his business associates, feigning illness or school obligations. But time was running out. Victor's debts were mounting, and the men who came to collect were growing more impatient and violent. Twice, Aretha came home to find her mother with fresh bruises, silently washing dishes or folding laundry as if nothing had happened. We need to leave, Aretha pleaded after the second incident. There are places that can help us. Clarice's once beautiful face, now prematurely lined and perpetually fearful, crumpled. He'll find us. He always does. Not this time. I've been planning. You don't understand what he's capable of, Clarice interrupted, her voice dropping to a whisper, though Victor wasn't home. The people he knows, they have reach. Aretha wanted to argue, to shake her mother out of the learned helplessness that had become her prison. But the terror in Clarice's eyes was real. Whatever Victor had done or threatened beyond what Aretha knew had broken something fundamental in her mother's spirit. The tipping point came on a sweltering July evening. Victor had been gone for 2 days, not unusual during his gambling binges. Aretha had just helped her mother to bed, alarmed by the heat radiating from Clarice's thin frame and the rattle in her chest when she breathed. We need to get you to a doctor, Aretha insisted, placing a cool cloth on her mother's forehead. Clarice weakly shook her head. No insurance, no money. I have money, Aretha admitted. I've been saving. The front door crashed open with such force that both women flinched. Victor staggered in, his face a mask of panic and calculation, sweat staining his shirt despite the air conditioning. Pack a bag, he ordered Aretha without preamble. Nice clothes, makeup, make yourself look good. Aretha froze. What? Victor grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises. Don't play stupid. You've got 10 minutes. There's a man coming, an important man. You're going to be very nice to him. I'm not going anywhere, Aretha said, jerking her arm free. And I'm certainly not being nice to anyone. The back of Victor's hand connected with her cheek before she saw it coming, the signet ring he wore for show tearing her skin. This isn't a negotiation, he snarled, spraying spittle. Do you have any idea what kind of shit I'm in? These people will kill me, kill us all if I don't make good. Clarice struggled to sit up, her face ashen. Victor, please. She's just a girl. She's merchandise, Victor snapped, and right now she's the only thing standing between us and a shallow grave. Aretha tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. Who is he? Victor's expression shifted, a cunning light entering his bloodshot eyes. Philip Reese. The name hung in the air like a physical presence. Even Aretha, who avoided the news when possible, knew of Philip Reese, billionaire real estate magnate, owner of half the commercial property in the city, rumored to have connections that extended from City Hall to the criminal underworld. "What does Philip Reese want with me?" she asked, though the sickening truth was already forming in her mind. Victor's laugh was hollow. "What do men like that always want? One night with you squares my debt? Simple as that. I won't do it." Aretha's voice was steel, her father's determination rising within her. Victor's face darkened. "Yes, you will." He moved to Clarice's bedside with 2 quick strides and wrapped a hand around her throat. "Or your mother pays the price." "Stop." Aretha lunged forward, but Victor's free hand shot out, keeping her at bay. 10 minutes, he repeated, squeezing Clarice's throat until her eyes bulged. "Or I'll make you watch while I finish what these past few years started with her." Clarice's terrified eyes locked with Aretha's, silently pleading. Though whether for Aretha to comply or flee, Aretha couldn't tell. The moment stretched, taut with violence and desperation. Then headlights swept across the apartment windows as several vehicles pulled up outside. Victor released Clarice, who collapsed into a coughing fit. "Time's up," he said, smoothing his hair and straightening his wrinkled shirt. "Philip Reese doesn't like to be kept waiting." Heavy footsteps sounded on the building's exterior stairs. A sharp, authoritative knock rattled the flimsy door. "Remember," Victor hissed as he moved to answer it, "your mother's life depends on how cooperative you are tonight." As the door swung open, Aretha caught her first glimpse of the man who would change the course of her life forever. Philip Reese stood framed in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit despite the summer heat, his silver-streaked dark hair perfectly styled. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. 2 men in dark suits flanked him, their eyes constantly scanning for threats, hands resting near concealed weapons. Reese's cold gaze swept the apartment, disgust briefly flickering across his features before settling on Aretha. She felt naked under his assessment, though she was fully clothed in jeans and a t-shirt. "This is the girl?" he asked Victor, his voice cultured and dispassionate. Victor nodded eagerly. "Just as promised, pure as driven snow." Reese's mouth curved in a smile that never reached his eyes. "We'll see." Behind her, Clarice began to sob, broken, desperate sounds that tore at Aretha's heart. In that moment, staring into Philip Reese's calculating eyes, while her mother wept and Victor practically vibrated with nervous relief, Aretha understood with crystal clarity that her childhood had ended long ago, but her agency, her power to choose, that was something even these men couldn't take unless she surrendered it. She stepped forward, chin high. "I'll get my coat." Chapter 2. The Devil's Bargain. 6 hours before he arrived at Aretha's apartment, Philip Reese sat at a mahogany poker table in the back room of the Gilded Lily, a members-only club that existed on no business registry. The air hung thick with cigar smoke and tension as 5 men played what appeared to be a friendly game of poker. Nothing about this game was friendly. 20,000, Reese said, sliding a stack of chips forward, his expression revealing nothing. He never sweated, never fidgeted, never gave the slightest tell. It was what made him both feared and respected in these circles, and why lesser men like Victor Chambers kept accepting his invitations despite consistently losing. Victor stared at his cards, then at the pot, desperation rolling off him in waves. He was already down nearly 90,000, money he didn't have. His fingers trembled slightly as he tapped the green felt. "Call," he said, pushing his remaining chips forward, "and I'll throw in something special to cover the rest." Across the table, Tommy Vega snorted. "What have you got left to bet, Vic? Your wife's already hawked her wedding ring, and that shitbox car of yours wouldn't cover the valet tip." Victor's eyes hardened. He leaned toward Reese, lowering his voice. "My stepdaughter, 17, looks 20. Virgin. I guarantee it." The table fell silent. Even in this world of fluid morality, some lines weren't casually crossed. Reese's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a predatory focus narrowing on Victor's sweating face. "Show your cards." Victor laid down his hand. 2 pair, kings and tens. Not bad, but not great. With deliberate slowness, Reese revealed his cards one by one. The 10 of diamonds, the jack of diamonds, the queen of diamonds, the king of diamonds, and with a slight smile, the ace of diamonds, a royal flush. Victor's face went gray. "Looks like your luck hasn't changed, Victor," Reese observed mildly. "Now about this additional collateral." "Philip," one of the other players murmured with a note of warning. Reese silenced him with a glance. "I believe Mr. Chambers and I have some business to discuss in private." He stood, buttoning his immaculately tailored jacket. "My office, Victor. Now." The office was a study in power and privilege. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, the lights glittering like the stars that couldn't be seen through the light pollution. Rare books and artwork, worth more than Victor would earn in 3 lifetimes, decorated the walls. A crystal decanter of amber liquid sat on a side table. "Drink," Reese offered, as if this were a normal business meeting and not a negotiation involving a human being. Victor nodded eagerly, desperate for liquid courage. Reese poured a generous measure into a crystal tumbler and handed it to him, but took nothing for himself. He never drank during business, never clouded his judgment. "Tell me about her," Reese said, sitting behind a desk that had once belonged to a 19th century railroad baron. Victor gulped half the whiskey. "Aretha, gorgeous girl, smart too, honor roll, could have gone to college if we had the money. Got her mother's looks, but better. Tall, curves in all the right places, skin like caramel." "Spare me the sales pitch," Reese cut in. "I'm not interested in your stepdaughter's academic achievements or your assessment of her physical attributes. What I want to know is, will she cause problems?" Victor shifted uncomfortably. "She's spirited, but her mother's sick. She'll cooperate to protect her." Reese steepled his fingers, studying Victor like a scientist might study a particularly disappointing specimen. "You disgust me, Victor." Victor blinked, wrong-footed. "What? You? Disgust? Me?" Reese enunciated each word with precise disdain. "Not because of what you're offering. I've seen men sell their souls for far less. But because you're too weak and pathetic to even own your depravity." "I don't understand." "Of course you don't." Reese stood, walking to the window to gaze out at his city. "You're a small man, Victor. Small in ambition, small in capability, small in character. Men like you are necessary in this world. You remind men like me of the consequences of weakness. But don't pretend this is about protecting your family. This is about saving your own worthless skin." Victor drained his glass, anger flaring beneath his fear. "You gonna lecture me on morality while accepting my offer? That's rich." Reese turned, a cold smile playing on his lips. "Who said I was accepting?" Victor's face fell. "But your debt stands at $115,000, Reese continued, returning to his desk and opening a leather portfolio. With the standard interest my organization charges, that's approximately $126,500 by midnight tonight. I can't possibly... I'm aware. Reese's tone was clipped. Which leaves you with three options. One, you disappear, though I assure you there's nowhere my reach doesn't extend. Two, you face the consequences of your actions, which would be unpleasant. Or three, he paused. Victor leaned forward eagerly. Three, I meet this stepdaughter of yours. If she's what you claim, perhaps we can come to an arrangement. Hope flickered across Victor's face. Yes, tonight. I'll bring her to wherever... No, Reese interrupted. I'll come to you. I want to see this hovel you keep your family in. I want to see the mother you claim to care about. I want to see the full extent of the misery you've created. Victor swallowed hard. When? Reese checked his watch, a timepiece worth more than most people's homes. 3 hours. And Victor, if you're lying about any aspect of this girl, I will personally ensure that your end is neither quick nor dignified. The threat hung in the air between them, absolute and irrefutable. As Victor shuffled out of the office, shoulders hunched like a beaten dog, Reese pressed a button on his desk phone. Harrison, prepare the car and tell Blackwood and Martinez to accompany us. We have a collection to make. Yes, sir, the disembodied voice responded. The usual equipment? Reese considered for a moment. And the contingency package. Understood. Alone again, Reese moved to a hidden wall, safe concealed behind a Modigliani. Inside, past the expected stacks of currency and documents, lay a small wooden box. He opened it to reveal a delicate pearl necklace, yellowed with age but still exquisite. Almost time, he murmured to the necklace, an unfamiliar emotion flickering across his features before disappearing behind his customary mask of control. He closed the box, replaced it in the safe, and turned back to his empire of glass and steel. From this height, the people below looked like ants, insignificant, replaceable, existing only to serve their purpose in the greater machinery of his world. Just as Victor Chambers served his purpose, just as this girl, Aretha, would serve hers. Reese had built his fortune on understanding the market value of everything and everyone. Tonight was simply another transaction. The convoy of black SUVs with tinted windows rolled through the rundown neighborhood like a funeral procession. Even the local drug dealers and hustlers stepped back into the shadows as Reese's vehicles passed, recognizing power when they saw it. In the back seat of the lead vehicle, Reese reviewed a dossier hastily compiled by his staff. Aretha Franklin, 17th honor student at Washington High School despite challenging circumstances. Mother, Clarice Chambers, 38, multiple health issues, works 3 part-time jobs. Biological father, James Franklin, deceased, convenience store robbery. No criminal record for either mother or daughter. No social media presence. Attached was a grainy photograph from the high school yearbook. Even in poor resolution, the girl's beauty was evident, not the manufactured prettiness of the women who usually orbited his world, but something more authentic. Her eyes in particular captured his attention. They held a fierce intelligence and determination that seemed at odds with her circumstances. Interesting, Reese murmured, closing the file as the vehicles pulled up to the dilapidated apartment building. The building itself was offensive to his sensibilities. Peeling paint, broken concrete steps, security door propped open with a brick. The stench of garbage and urine assaulted him as he stepped from the climate-controlled comfort of his vehicle. Wait here, he instructed his driver. Blackwood, Martinez, with me. The rest of you secure the perimeter. No interruptions. His security team moved with practiced efficiency, taking positions while maintaining constant communication through discreet earpieces. Reese straightened his cuffs and ascended the crumbling steps, his Italian leather shoes incongruous against the filthy concrete. The elevator was out of order, of course it was, so they took the stairs to the 4th floor. Reese didn't hurry, didn't allow the surroundings to dictate his pace. Power wasn't just about having money. It was about controlling every situation, every interaction. Apartment 4C's door was battered, the peephole covered with duct tape. Reese nodded to Martinez, who knocked with enough force to rattle the frame. After a moment, Victor opened the door, pale and sweating. "Mr. Reese, please come in." The apartment was small and cluttered, but surprisingly clean, given the building's condition. A woman's touch, Reese presumed, certainly not Victor's. Through an open doorway, he glimpsed a frail woman in bed, her worried eyes tracking their entrance. And then he saw her, Aretha, standing in the center of the main room, chin raised defiantly despite the red mark blooming on her cheek. She wore simple jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup, no pretense at seduction. Victor had clearly failed to convince her to dress the part. For a fraction of a second, something unexpected stirred in Reese's chest as their eyes met. Not desire, though she was indeed beautiful, but recognition. He saw in her what he seldom encountered, an equal force of will, merely lacking his resources and experience. "This is the girl?" he asked Victor, his voice cultured and dispassionate. Victor nodded eagerly, just as promised, pure as driven snow. Reese's mouth curved in a smile that never reached his eyes. "We'll see." Behind Aretha, her mother began to sob, broken sounds that filled the small space. Reese observed the way Aretha's shoulders tensed at the sound, the subtle shift in her expression from defiance to resolve. "I'll get my coat," she said, her voice steady despite everything. As she moved to a closet near the door, Reese caught the glint of something in her pocket, a small kitchen knife, poorly concealed. His security team spotted it too, hands moving toward their weapons. Reese gave them a subtle signal to stand down. This was getting more interesting by the moment. "Your chariot awaits, Miss Franklin," he said, gesturing toward the door with mock gallantry. She brushed past him, the knife staying in her pocket. Smart girl. She knew she'd have no chance against armed professionals, but wanted the illusion of protection. "Wait," her mother called weakly from the bedroom. "Please don't take her." Victor moved to silence his wife, but Reese stopped him with a raised hand. "Let me make something perfectly clear," he said, addressing the room but looking directly at Aretha. "I'm not some common thug who gets his thrills from forcing unwilling women. I'm a businessman. Everything in my world is a transaction. Tonight, your daughter settles your husband's debt. How that debt is settled remains to be seen." Something flickered in Aretha's eyes, not hope, but calculation. Good. He preferred dealing with intelligence over blind fear. "If any harm comes to my mother while I'm gone," Aretha said, her voice soft but steel-edged, "there will be consequences." Victor laughed nervously. "She doesn't mean—" "I believe she does," Reese interrupted, finding himself oddly impressed. "And she's right to be concerned." He turned to Victor. "My men will remain here until we return. Your wife will receive medical attention. Yes, I noticed her condition, and you will remain on your best behavior. Consider it part of our arrangement." Victor's face fell as he realized he wouldn't be free to flee while Aretha was gone. "Of course, Mr. Reese." Reese offered his arm to Aretha with old-world formality. "Shall we?" She ignored his arm but preceded him through the door, head high like a queen walking to her execution. As they descended the stairs, Reese found himself studying her profile. In another life, born to different circumstances, she might have been formidable. Perhaps she still could be. "The knife is unnecessary," he said quietly as they reached the building's entrance. "I give you my word that no physical harm will come to you tonight." Aretha's laugh was bitter and ancient beyond her years. "Forgive me if the word of a man who collects women as debt payments doesn't carry much weight." Their eyes met again, and Reese felt that unexpected jolt of recognition. Most people cringed in his presence, desperate to please or paralyzed with fear. This girl, with everything to lose and no power to speak of, looked at him as an equal. A fair assessment, he conceded as they stepped outside. His security detail formed a protective barrier around them, guiding them toward the waiting vehicles. As Reese opened the car door for her, Aretha hesitated, looking back at the apartment building where her mother remained. For a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing the terrified teenager beneath the brave facade. "My mother will be safe," Reese said, softer than he intended. "You have my word on that, at least." Aretha met his gaze one more time, searching for truth or deception. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she ducked into the vehicle. As Reese settled beside her, he became acutely aware of a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades. Discomfort. Not physical, but moral, a distant echo of the conscience he'd thought long buried beneath ambition and power. The convoy pulled away from the curb, carrying them toward his penthouse and whatever awaited them there. A debt would be settled tonight, one way or another. But for perhaps the first time in his adult life, Philip Reese wasn't entirely certain of the outcome. Chapter 3. Sacrifice. The elevator ascended silently to Reese's penthouse. Aretha stood rigidly in the corner, hand near the hidden knife in her pocket. Reese's guards watched her carefully. "Your mother will receive medical care within the hour," Reese said casually. The doors opened directly into his penthouse, a sprawling space of marble, glass, and luxury. The view of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking, but Aretha felt only dread. His security team remained in the elevator as the doors closed, leaving them alone. "This way," Reese led her to a sitting room. "Please, sit." Aretha remained standing. "Let's not pretend this is a social visit." "You misunderstand the situation," Reese said, pouring her water from a crystal decanter. "I have no intention of forcing myself on you." "Then why am I here?" "Because your stepfather is a desperate, despicable man who offered you as collateral. And you're here because you believe your presence protects your mother." Confusion crossed Aretha's face. "I don't understand." "Victor believes you're servicing me sexually in exchange for his debt. It's important for your safety that he continues to believe that." Aretha's defenses faltered slightly. "What do you want from me?" "A conversation. Truth." Reese studied her. "You intrigue me, Ms. Franklin." "So I'm what? A curiosity?" "A psychological experiment. If you prefer that framing to the alternative, yes." Reese gestured again to the sofa. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." Reluctantly, Aretha perched on the edge of the sofa. "So what happens now?" "We talk. You stay until morning. Victor believes his debt is settled. Your mother receives medical care and you return home unharmed." "And the knife?" she asked, tension still evident in her shoulders. "Keep it if it provides comfort. But I assure you, if I intended you harm, that small blade would make little difference." Aretha finally took a sip of water, her mind racing with confusion and suspicion. "Why would you do this? What's your angle?" Reese leaned forward. "Because in a world of predictable, disappointing people, you're different. The way you carry yourself despite your circumstances. Your willingness to sacrifice for your mother. Your refusal to be broken." "I'm not a character study," Aretha said coldly. "No, you're not." Reese's expression softened minutely. "You're a reminder." "Of what?" Reese didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked, "What would you do if you were free of Victor? If your mother were healthy, safe?" The unexpected question caught Aretha off guard. I'd finish school, college maybe, law school eventually." "Ambitious." "Necessary," she corrected. "People like Victor and men who exploit them exist because the system lets them. I want to change that. Something flickered in Reese's eyes. Approval, perhaps. He stood suddenly. "Show me the knife," Aretha tensed. "Why?" "Because I'm asking." After a moment's hesitation, she withdrew the small paring knife from her pocket. Reese nodded toward a painting on the wall. "Behind that is a safe. The combination is 203618. Open it." Her suspicion evident, Aretha approached the painting and removed it, revealing a wall safe. She entered the combination, surprised when it actually opened. "Take out the wooden box," Reese instructed. Inside the safe were stacks of cash and documents, but Aretha found the small wooden box he mentioned. She brought it back to the sofa. "Open it," Reese said. Inside lay an antique pearl necklace, beautiful despite its age. "It belonged to my mother," Reese explained. "The only possession she managed to keep when my father gambled away everything else before abandoning us. She worked 3 jobs to raise me after he left. Died of pneumonia because she couldn't afford proper medical care." Aretha looked up at him, shocked by this unexpected vulnerability. "I am not a good man, Miss Franklin," Reese continued. "I've spent decades building power by any means necessary. But I recognize in you what I once was, before I decided that becoming like the men who destroyed my family was the only way to ensure I was never powerless again." "Is that supposed to make me sympathize with you?" Aretha asked, though her tone had lost some of its edge. "Number, it's meant to explain why you're here, unharmed, instead of being what Victor intended." Reese took the box from her hands, closing it carefully. "Tomorrow, you'll return home. Victor will believe his debt is settled. Your mother will continue to receive medical care. I've already arranged it. And you'll have a decision to make." "What decision?" "Whether to remain in that apartment, counting the days until Victor finds another way to exploit you, or to accept my offer." "What offer?" Aretha's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Education. A chance to become someone who can change the system you so rightfully despise." Reese's expression was unreadable. "No strings, no expectations, no debt. Why would you do that?" "Because sometimes even men like me need to remember where we came from." Reese stood. "There's a guest room prepared for you. Lock the door if you wish. In the morning, we'll return to your apartment, and you can give Victor the performance of your life. Let him believe you've suffered appropriately to clear his debt." Aretha stood as well, still wary but increasingly confused by this unexpected turn. "And if I refuse your offer?" "Then you walk away. The choice is entirely yours." As Reese showed her to the guest room, a space larger than her entire apartment, Aretha felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. The villain of her story had suddenly revealed unexpected complexity, and the path forward was no longer clear. "Why did you tell me about your mother?" she asked as they reached the guest room door. Reese paused. "Perhaps because you're the first person in decades I've met who might understand what it means to sacrifice everything for someone you love." He left her then, alone with her thoughts, and an impossible decision. Aretha locked the door, still clutching the knife, and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry, not from fear or despair, but from the overwhelming complexity of a world that wasn't as black and white as she'd believed. In the morning, she would return to Victor's apartment with a secret that might change everything. But for tonight, in this strange moment of unexpected safety, Aretha finally slept without nightmares. Chapter 4. The Night That Changed Everything. Morning light filtered through the penthouse windows when Aretha woke. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. The silk sheets, the vast room, the silence free from Victor's snoring or arguing. Then reality crashed back. She was in Philip Reese's penthouse. Her mother was still in that apartment with Victor, and she had a decision to make. The bathroom attached to the guest room was larger than her bedroom at home. Aretha showered quickly, The hot water and expensive toiletries, a luxury she couldn't afford to savor. When she emerged, she found fresh clothes laid out, simple but high-quality jeans and a blouse that somehow fit perfectly. She changed, keeping her own clothes folded neatly in her arms. She wouldn't leave them behind, wouldn't accept anything more than necessary from this man. When she opened the bedroom door, a young woman in a uniform was waiting. "Mr. Reese is having breakfast on the terrace, miss. He asked if you would join him." Aretha followed her through the labyrinth of opulence to an outdoor space overlooking the city. Reese sat at a glass table laden with food, reading something on a tablet. He stood when she appeared. "Miss Franklin, I trust you slept well." "Better than expected," she admitted, setting her folded clothes on an empty chair. "Please, eat." He gestured to the spread of fruit, pastries, and coffee. "We have a performance to put on shortly. You'll need your strength." Aretha sat cautiously, selecting a piece of toast. "You mentioned my mother received medical care. Dr. Patel arrived shortly after we left. Your mother has pneumonia, likely exacerbated by stress and malnutrition. She's receiving appropriate treatment now. My staff reports she's resting comfortably." Relief washed over Aretha, quickly followed by suspicion. And Victor? Under supervision. He attempted to leave once during the night, but was persuaded to remain. Aretha stared into her coffee, gathering courage for what she needed to say. "Last night, your offer. I need to understand exactly what you're proposing." Reese set down his tablet. "It's simple, really. I will provide funds for your education, college, law school if that remains your ambition, a modest living stipend, and appropriate medical care for your mother in a facility where Victor cannot reach her." "In exchange for what?" Aretha's voice hardened. "Because if you think delayed payment is more Nothing," Reese interrupted. "No conditions, no expectations, no future obligations." "People like you don't give something for nothing," Aretha challenged. Reese's expression remained impassive. "Perhaps not usually, no." "Then why?" "Consider it an investment in potential, or perhaps atonement, though I claim no moral awakening." Reese leaned forward slightly. "Does the why matter so much if it offers you and your mother freedom from Victor?" Aretha set down her fork. "Yes, it matters. Because I need to know if I'm trading one form of control for another." Something like respect flickered in Reese's eyes. "A valid concern. The funds would be placed in a trust. Once established, I would have no ability to withdraw them or attach additional conditions. Your mother's medical care would be guaranteed for 5 years, by which time you should be established enough to take over if necessary. The apartment where you'd stay is owned by one of my subsidiaries, but would be leased to you properly, with full tenant rights." "And if I take this offer, what do you get?" Reese considered his answer carefully. "The satisfaction of denying Victor something he values, the knowledge that at least once my wealth served a purpose other than accumulating more wealth." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "And perhaps someday, the interesting prospect of facing a formidable opposing counsel who once sat at my breakfast table." Aretha studied him, searching for deception. "I haven't decided yet. I wouldn't expect you to. This isn't a decision to make hastily." Reese checked his watch. "It's time we returned. Your stepfather will be growing anxious." The ride back to the apartment was silent. Aretha rehearsed her role mentally. She would need to appear traumatized but not broken to convince Victor the debt was settled without revealing the truth. "When we arrive," Reese said as they neared the building, "I'll speak with Victor privately. You'll have a moment with your mother. My men will remain present but discreet." Aretha nodded, steeling herself. "And after you leave, Dr. Patel will continue your mother's treatment regardless of your decision. Should you choose to accept my offer, Contact this number. He handed her a plain business card with only a phone number. The line is secure and private. You'll have 48 hours to decide. The SUV pulled up to the curb. Unlike last night, Reese exited first, then offered his hand to help her out. Aretha ignored it, climbing out on her own. As they walked up the building's steps, she noticed bruising on her wrist from where Victor had grabbed her. Perfect physical evidence to support her deception. At apartment 4C, one of Reese's men opened the door. Victor sat at the kitchen table, looking haggard and anxious. Through the bedroom door, Aretha saw her mother sleeping peacefully, an IV drip beside her bed and oxygen tubes in her nose. "Mama," she whispered, moving quickly to her side. Clarice's eyes fluttered open, relief flooding her face. "Aretha, you're okay." Her voice was weak but clearer than it had been in weeks. "I'm fine, Mama. The doctor's helping you?" Clarice nodded, tears forming. "I was so scared for you." "I know, but I'm back now." Aretha squeezed her hand, lowering her voice. "Did Victor hurt you after I left?" "No," Clarice whispered. "These men, they've been watching him all night." In the living room, Reese's commanding voice carried clearly. "The debt is settled, Victor. Consider yourself fortunate." "Yes, Mr. Reese, thank you for your generosity." "Don't mistake pragmatism for generosity," Reese replied coldly. "Our business is concluded. Should you attempt to create any new arrangements involving your stepdaughter, you'll find my response considerably less civilized." Victor muttered something inaudible. Aretha stroked her mother's hair, taking in the improved color in her cheeks. "The doctor says I have pneumonia," Clarice said. "He's given me medicine, said I need to rest." "That's what you'll do then," Aretha assured her. "Just focus on getting better." Reese appeared in the doorway, his imposing figure filling the frame. "Mrs. Chambers, I'm pleased to see you responding well to treatment. Dr. Patel will continue visiting daily until you've recovered." Clarice looked at him with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Thank you," she managed. Reese turned to Aretha. "Miss Franklin, a word." In the hallway outside the bedroom, he spoke quietly. "You have 48 hours. Whether you accept my offer or not, I suggest you consider your living situation carefully. Victor's type rarely learns lasting lessons." "I understand," Aretha said, matching his professional tone while aware of Victor watching from the kitchen. Reese extended his hand formally, and this time Aretha took it, maintaining the charade. His palm was warm and dry against her skin, the handshake firm but not dominating. "Until we meet again, Miss Franklin." His words contained layers of meaning only she would understand. "Goodbye, Mr. Reese." Aretha infused her voice with just enough trembling to convince Victor of her ordeal. With a final nod, Reese departed, his security detail following. As the door closed behind them, Victor approached cautiously. "You did good, Aretha," he said, his relief palpable. "Real good. Cleared my debt completely." Aretha turned slowly, letting him see the bruise on her wrist, the hollow look she'd practiced in her eyes. "Don't speak to me," she whispered, her voice deadly quiet. "Don't look at me. Don't even breathe in my direction." Victor took a step back, surprised by her controlled fury. "Now listen." "No, you listen." Aretha moved closer, her voice still barely above a whisper. "What you did can never be undone. I will never forgive you, and I promise you this. If you ever try to use me or my mother again, I will destroy you." Fear flickered across Victor's face. Something had changed in Aretha overnight, a hardening, a dangerous new edge. He retreated to the couch, avoiding her gaze. Aretha returned to her mother's side, her decision already made, though she would take the full 48 hours to plan. Her hand closed around the business card in her pocket. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something dangerous. Hope. Outside, Reese's convoy pulled away from the curb. In the back seat, he opened the small wooden box containing his mother's pearl necklace. Phase 1 complete, he murmured to himself, closing the box with a decisive snap. He didn't doubt Aretha would call. In that, at least, they were similar. Neither would waste an opportunity for escape, for power, for justice. He had recognized in her eyes the same hunger that had driven him decades ago. The difference was, perhaps, that hers was uncorrupted by bitterness. Not yet, anyway. But time would tell what kind of person Aretha Franklin would become when given the chance to rise. Chapter 5. The Vow. 48 hours felt like both an eternity and an instant. Aretha spent them planning meticulously, leaving nothing to chance. While her mother slept under the effects of medication, she packed essentials into 2 small bags, one for each of them. She hid them beneath her bed, ready for swift departure. Dr. Patel returned twice, his quiet competence reassuring. He addressed Aretha rather than Victor, explaining her mother's condition and treatment in detailed, respectful terms. "The oxygen and antibiotics are working," he told her on the second day. "But your mother needs proper nutrition and reduced stress to fully recover." "I understand," Aretha replied, ignoring Victor's presence in the doorway. "We're working on that." Victor maintained his distance, watching Aretha with wary, confused eyes. The power dynamic had shifted overnight, and he sensed it even if he didn't understand why. Twice he attempted conversation, offering awkward apologies that rang hollow. Aretha responded with icy silence. On the second evening, as her deadline approached, Aretha sat beside her sleeping mother. "We're leaving, Mama," she whispered, stroking Clarice's hand. "Tomorrow, we're getting out of here for good." Her mother's eyes fluttered open. "Where would we go?" "Victor would find us." "No, he won't." Aretha's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "I've found a way out." "How?" Aretha hesitated, crafting her explanation carefully. "Mr. Reese, he has a foundation that helps people in situations like ours, abuse survivors." The lie tasted bitter but necessary. "They're offering us an apartment, medical care for you, and education funding for me." Clarice's brow furrowed with suspicion. "Why would he help us, after what Victor did?" "It's not about Victor. It's about us deserving a chance." Aretha squeezed her mother's hand. "Do you trust me, Mama?" Tears filled Clarice's eyes. "Of course I do, baby, but I'm scared." "I know, but being scared here is worse than being scared somewhere new." Aretha leaned closer. "I need you to be ready tomorrow morning. Can you do that for me?" Clarice nodded weakly. "What about Victor?" "Leave Victor to me." At exactly 8 p.m., Aretha locked herself in the bathroom and pulled out the business card. She dialed the number with steady fingers. A woman answered on the second ring. "Yes? This is Aretha Franklin." "One moment." Seconds later, Reese's voice came on the line. "Miss Franklin, I've been expecting your call." "I accept your offer," Aretha said without preamble, "but I have conditions." A pause, then what might have been a chuckle. "You're in no position to make demands, Ms. Franklin." "I'm not making demands, I'm establishing boundaries." Aretha kept her voice low but firm. "My mother comes with me. Whatever facility you arranged, we stay together. And I want legal protection from Victor, a restraining order at minimum." Another pause. "Reasonable terms. Anything else?" "Yes, I don't want charity. When I'm established, I'll repay every cent." This time, Reese's amusement was unmistakable. "As you wish, though no interest will be charged. When do you want to leave?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Victor normally goes out for breakfast after my mother takes her medication. A car will be waiting 2 blocks east. Black sedan, driver named Ellis. He'll have identification." Aretha gripped the phone tighter. "And Victor? What about him?" "Will he come after us?" Reese's voice cooled. Victor will be discouraged from pursuing you permanently. The implication sent a chill down Aretha's spine. I don't want him hurt. I just want him out of our lives. Some lessons require pain, Miss Franklin. No. Aretha's voice hardened. That's my condition. No violence. Find another way. Silence stretched between them, a test of wills. Finally, Reese spoke. Very well. I respect your principles, misguided though they may be. Victor will remain unharmed but thoroughly discouraged. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Ms. Franklin. Your journey is just beginning and it won't be easy. Law school is challenging enough without your background complications. Aretha straightened her shoulders, though he couldn't see her. I'm not afraid of hard work. No, Reese agreed. You certainly aren't. Until tomorrow, then. The line went dead. Aretha tucked the card into her bra and unlocked the bathroom door. Victor sat on the couch, watching a basketball game, beer in hand. Who were you talking to? He asked suspiciously. Myself, Aretha replied coldly. Practicing what I'll tell the therapist I'll eventually need after what you did. Victor flinched, his gaze dropping to the floor. Aretha, I was desperate. You gotta understand. I understand perfectly. She cut him off. You've shown me exactly who you are. Now I'm showing you who I am. She turned her back on him and walked to her mother's room, his confused stare burning between her shoulder blades. Morning came with gray skies and light rain, fitting weather for endings and beginnings. Aretha helped her mother take her medication, watching the clock carefully. At 8:30, Victor grabbed his jacket. Going for breakfast, he muttered. Need anything? Nothing from you, Aretha replied without looking at him. The door closed behind him with a defeated click. Aretha waited 5 minutes to ensure he was gone, then moved with swift efficiency. It's time, Mama, she said, retrieving the hidden bags. Can you walk? Clarice nodded, pushing herself up with effort. Where are we going? Somewhere better. Aretha helped her into a raincoat. Somewhere he can't find us. They moved slowly down the 4 flights of stairs, Clarice leaning heavily on her daughter. The building was quiet, most residents already gone to work or school. Outside, the rain fell in a gentle mist, beating on their coats. 2 blocks, Aretha said, supporting her mother's weight. We can make it. They'd gone half a block when Aretha sensed someone behind them. She turned, fear spiking, to find Victor standing there, rain dripping from his hair. Where do you think you're going? His voice was low, dangerous. Clarice trembled against Aretha. Victor, please. Shut up. He stepped closer. You think you can just leave after everything I've done for you? Aretha positioned herself between him and her mother. Walk away, Victor. This is your only warning. He laughed an ugly sound. My only warning? Who do you think you are now? One night with Reese and you think you're better than me. I've always been better than you, Aretha said quietly. I just never said it out loud before. Victor's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, grabbing for Aretha's arm. You ungrateful little... A car horn blared as a black sedan screeched to a halt beside them. The door flew open and a mountain of a man emerged, one of Reese's security personnel. Mr. Chambers, the man said pleasantly, I believe you're late for your appointment. Victor froze, confusion replacing anger. What appointment? The one Mr. Reese scheduled. The man smiled without warmth. He sends his regards and a reminder of your discussion. All color drained from Victor's face. I didn't mean. Of course not. The man stepped between Victor and the women. Now, you have 2 options. You can walk away and forget this family exists, or you can have a much more detailed conversation with me about Mr. Reese's expectations. Your choice. Victor's gaze darted between the security man and Aretha. Whatever he saw in her eyes made him step back. "They're not worth the trouble anyway," he muttered, attempting to salvage his pride. "A wise decision." The man turned to Aretha. "Miss Franklin, your car is waiting." A second black sedan had pulled up behind the first. The driver, Ellis, presumably, stood by the open rear door. "If you ever come near us again," Aretha said to Victor, her voice steady, "I will destroy you, not with fists or threats, but with laws and courts and justice. Remember that." She helped her mother into the waiting car, never looking back at the man who had nearly sold her life away. As the door closed and the vehicle pulled smoothly into traffic, Clarice began to cry. "It's really over?" she asked between sobs. Aretha took her hand, watching the neighborhood that had been their prison recede through the rain-streaked window. "It's over," she confirmed, "and something new is beginning." What that something was, redemption, revenge, rebirth, remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, Aretha allowed herself to feel the dangerous lightness of freedom, and with it, the heavy responsibility of choice. Meanwhile, across town, Philip Reese signed the final documents establishing the Franklin Educational Trust. The lawyer across from him slid the papers into a folder. "It's unusual to create a trust with such specific limitations on your control, Mr. Reese," the lawyer observed. "Many things about this situation are unusual," Reese replied, capping his pen. "Send copies to the address I provided." As the lawyer left, Reese turned to the window. The rain was stopping, sunlight beginning to break through the clouds. He thought of the girl. No, the young woman who had looked him in the eye and demanded boundaries even when she had no leverage. A worthy investment indeed. And perhaps, though he would never admit it aloud, a form of atonement for the man he had become. Chapter 6. The Reluctant Champion. 2 years passed with the relentless momentum of a life rebuilt from scratch. Aretha excelled in her undergraduate studies, maintaining a perfect GPA while working part-time at a law firm as a file clerk. Her mother's health improved in the modest but comfortable 2-bedroom apartment Reese had arranged, away from the stress and deprivation that had nearly killed her. Their new life wasn't luxurious. Reese had been true to his word about providing necessities without excess, but it was stable, safe. The trust covered tuition, books, basic living expenses, and Clarice's ongoing medical care. Everything else Aretha earned herself. In those 2 years, she heard nothing directly from Philip Reese. The quarterly trust statements arrived like clockwork, impersonal documents that tracked her academic progress and expenses. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of him in the news, acquisitions, charity galas, political connections. But he remained a distant figure, the mysterious benefactor who had irrevocably altered her trajectory. Until the day she found Elam Truitt. It began with a research assignment for her pre-law constitutional rights class. Professor Winters had tasked them with analyzing a current case where established rights were being challenged. Most students chose high-profile Supreme Court cases, but Aretha found herself drawn to a local story buried in the back pages of the city paper. A development company was attempting to force residents from a low-income housing complex through legal loopholes and intimidation. The residents, primarily elderly and immigrant families, were fighting back with the help of a single attorney working pro bono. His name was Elam Truitt, a recent law school graduate with no firm backing him. "Foolish," her classmate Jenna commented when Aretha shared the article. "Going up against Westridge Development solo. Career suicide." Something about the David versus Goliath nature of the case resonated with Aretha. She found herself at the courthouse the following day, slipping into the back of the gallery to observe proceedings. Elam Truitt wasn't what she expected. Tall and lanky, with perpetually rumpled dark hair, he looked barely older than Aretha herself. His suit was off the rack and slightly too large, his legal documents organized in battered manila folders rather than the sleek portfolios the opposing counsel wielded. But when he spoke, the room changed. Despite his youth and obvious exhaustion, Truitt presented arguments with a passionate clarity that made complex legal concepts accessible to the anxious residents watching from the gallery. His voice carried conviction without arrogance, expertise without condescension. The defendants refer repeatedly to building code violations as justification for expedited eviction, Truitt argued, yet refused to provide specific documentation of these alleged violations. Without such evidence, these claims serve only as a smokescreen for what is, fundamentally, an attempt to circumvent tenant protection laws. The judge, an older woman with shrewd eyes, seemed to be taking his arguments seriously, much to the visible frustration of the development company's legal team. 3 polished attorneys from Jensen and Marsh, one of the city's most prestigious firms. When court adjourned for the day, Aretha followed Truitt into the hallway, watching as he spoke reassuringly to his clients in a mix of English and passable Spanish. After they dispersed, he slumped against the wall, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. Before she could second-guess herself, Aretha approached him. "Impressive arguments in there," she said, "especially the Fifth Amendment angle." Truitt looked up, surprise registering on his face. "Thanks." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You're not with Jensen and Marsh, are you?" "Because I've already declined their generous offer to settle." "No," Aretha smiled. "I'm a pre-law student at City University. Your case is fascinating from a constitutional perspective." Relief flickered across his features. "Well, I'm glad someone thinks so. Most of my law school colleagues call it career suicide." He extended his hand. "Elam Truitt. Aretha Franklin." She shook his hand, noting calluses that suggested he worked with more than just legal briefs. "Like the singer?" "Exactly like the singer," she confirmed with a practiced smile. He gathered his scattered papers. "Well, Aretha, like the singer, if you're interested in constitutional law being applied to actual human beings instead of corporations, you're welcome to observe. We reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. "I'll be there," she promised. "But actually, I was wondering if you could use some help. I work part-time at Sullivan and Reed filing papers, so I know my way around legal documents." Truitt studied her for a moment, wariness battling with desperate need for assistance. "Why would you volunteer your time for a losing battle?" "Is it losing?" Aretha challenged. A tired smile tugged at his mouth. "Not if I have anything to say about it." He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, I could use the help. I'm working out of a coffee shop on Elm Street, Grindhouse. The owner lets me use the back table during off hours." "I know it," Aretha said. "I'll come by after my classes tomorrow. Around 4, I'll be the one buried under motion filings and coffee cups." That night, Aretha found herself researching Elam Truitt instead of preparing for her economics midterm. There wasn't much to find. A graduation notice from state law school 3 years ago, a brief stint at a mid-sized firm that specialized in corporate law, and then nothing. Until this housing case. "Who drops corporate law to fight unwinnable housing cases?" Clarice asked, setting a cup of tea beside Aretha's laptop. "Someone with principles," Aretha replied, thinking of Truitt's passionate arguments. Or demons. She arrived at Grindhouse the next day to find Truitt exactly as described. Surrounded by paper towers and empty coffee mugs, his laptop balanced precariously on a stack of legal texts. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and a day's stubble suggested he'd been working through the night. "You actually came," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Most people don't follow through these days." "I'm not most people." Aretha set down her backpack and rolled up her sleeves. "Where do we start?" Over the next 4 hours, Aretha organized case files, transcribed handwritten notes, and helped prepare witness questions. Truitt worked with focused intensity, occasionally pausing to explain complex legal strategies or court procedures. His mind was quick, his knowledge impressive, but something haunted him, a wariness that surfaced whenever the conversation approached personal territory. "Why housing law?" Aretha finally asked as they packed up for the night. "You could make triple the money in corporate." Truitt's hands stilled on the papers he was gathering. "I did corporate, sold my soul for 2 years at Brenner and Whitman." His voice hardened. "Spent most of that time finding legal ways to help wealthy clients crush people like these residents." "What changed?" He was quiet for a long moment. "My last case, shopping mall development. The firm represented the developer who wanted to replace a residential block. Perfectly legal evictions, all the paperwork in order." His eyes took on a distant look. "There was this old woman, Mrs. Castillo, lived in her house for 40 years, raised her kids there, buried her husband. Place needed work, but it was home." Aretha waited silently as he gathered his thoughts. "I found a loophole that let the developer expedite her eviction, got praised for it, even got a bonus." Truitt's laugh was hollow. 2 weeks later, she died in the temporary housing they'd placed her in. Heart attack, they said, but he shook his head. "I killed her as surely as if I'd stopped her heart myself." "You were doing your job," Aretha said softly. "That's what everyone said." Truitt met her gaze directly. "But at some point, you have to decide what kind of lawyer, what kind of person you want to be. I decided I couldn't be that person anymore." The raw honesty struck Aretha deeply. Here was someone who had walked the path she feared, using the law as a weapon rather than a shield, and found it corrupting. "So you quit?" "I quit," Truitt confirmed. "Opened my own practice. Decided to help people the law usually ignores." His smile was self-deprecating. Hence the coffee shop office and ramen dinners. Aretha made a decision then, one that would alter her life's course as significantly as Reese's intervention had 2 years earlier. "I want to help," she said. "Not just with filing papers. I want to learn from you, work on these cases." Truitt's eyebrows rose. "I can't pay you. I can barely pay my internet bill." "I don't need money. I need experience. Real experience with real people, not corporate drones." Aretha leaned forward. "You need help, and I need a mentor who remembers why law matters. Your professors won't approve. This kind of law isn't the path to a corner office." "I don't want a corner office. I want justice." The words came from somewhere deep within her, a truth she hadn't fully articulated until that moment. Truitt studied her with new interest. "There's a story there." "There is," Aretha acknowledged. "Maybe I'll tell you someday." A silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. "Come back tomorrow," Truitt finally said. "We'll see if you still want to save the world after you've read through tenant ordinance violations." Aretha smiled. "I'll bring coffee." She didn't tell him about Reese, about Victor, about the night that had driven her toward law in the first place. Those stories would come later, when trust had been earned on both sides. For now, it was enough to have found someone who understood that the law could be either a weapon or a shield, depending on who wielded it. As she walked home that evening, her phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Interesting choice of mentor. Not the path I expected. PR." Aretha froze on the sidewalk, staring at the message. Of course he was watching, had probably been watching all along. After a moment's consideration, she typed back, "My choice to make." "But then you already knew that." The response came immediately. "Indeed. Mr. Truitt will need all the help he can get for his next case. Westridge Development is a subsidiary of Reese Enterprises." Aretha's breath caught. Not coincidence then, but design. A test, a challenge? She couldn't tell. "Is this a game to you?" she typed, anger flaring. This time, the response took longer. Not a game, an education. Learn from him, Ms. Franklin. He has principles worth understanding, if not emulating. Good evening. Aretha slipped the phone back into her pocket, mind racing. Reese was playing a longer game than she had realized, manipulating pieces, including her, on some unseen board. The question was, did that change her decision to work with Truitt? No, she decided. If anything, it strengthened her resolve. Elam Truitt was fighting Philip Reese's company without even knowing it. And now, so was she. The reluctant champion had found his unexpected ally, and Aretha Franklin had found her path forward, one that would eventually lead her back to the night everything changed, and the man who had both rescued and manipulated her. But that confrontation was still to come, for now she had motions to file and residents to protect. Justice, she was learning, was built one case, one client, one battle at a time. Chapter 7. The battle begins. They filed a motion to dismiss, Elam announced, dropping a thick document on the table between them. 3 months had passed since Aretha joined his makeshift legal team, and their working space had migrated from the coffee shop to a small office above a laundromat, a step up, if only barely. Aretha looked up from the legal brief she was editing. On what grounds? Every ground imaginable. Lack of standing, failure to state a claim, improper venue. He ran a hand through his perpetually disheveled hair. Plus a subtle suggestion that I'm incompetent and exploiting vulnerable clients for publicity. That's rich coming from them. Aretha reached for the motion. When's the hearing? Next Friday. Elam collapsed into the chair opposite her. We need to prepare responses to each claim, gather affidavits from residents, and compile building inspection records. Aretha was already scanning the document, her mind racing. The standing argument is weakest. We have clear documentation that all plaintiffs are legal tenants. We should focus our counter-motion there. Elam nodded, watching her with a mixture of admiration and curiosity that had become increasingly common. In 3 months, Aretha had progressed from filing clerk to essential strategist, her insights often cutting to the heart of complex legal issues. You know, he said casually, most pre-law students can barely define standing, let alone develop counter-strategies to dismissal motions. Aretha kept her expression neutral. I'm a fast learner. Extraordinarily fast. His tone was light but probing, almost as if you'd had previous exposure to high-level legal concepts. She met his gaze steadily. Is that a question, counselor? A smile tugged at his mouth. Not yet, just an observation. He stretched, wincing as his back cracked audibly. I'll start on the affidavits. Can you handle the counter-motion draft? Already outlining it in my head, Aretha confirmed. I'll have something for you to review by tomorrow. As Elam gathered his coat, his phone buzzed with a text. He checked it, his expression darkening. Problem? Aretha asked. Jensen and Marsh offered a settlement. Again, he showed her the screen. They want a meeting tomorrow to discuss terms. The message was professionally worded, but carried an unmistakable undercurrent of pressure. Westridge Development was offering modest relocation assistance in exchange for immediate vacating of all units. Are you going to meet them? Elam slipped the phone into his pocket. Have to. Ethical obligation to present offers to clients. You think the residents should take it? Hell no, he said without hesitation. It's pennies compared to what they're entitled to under tenant protection laws. But his shoulders sagged slightly. It might be all they get if we lose. Aretha recognized the weight of responsibility in his voice. We won't lose. Your confidence is admirable, if mathematically improbable. Elam offered a tired smile. David occasionally beats Goliath in stories, Aretha. In real life, Goliath has a team of lawyers and unlimited resources. Then we need to be smarter, she said simply. Go home, get some sleep. I'll finish this and meet you at court tomorrow. After he left, Aretha worked well into the night, crafting arguments and checking precedents. Around 1 a.m., her phone chimed with a notification, another text from the unknown number. Jensen and Marsh settlement offer, a trap. Real decision maker isn't Westridge. PR. Aretha's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She hadn't responded to Reese's texts since that first exchange, uncomfortable with his omniscient monitoring of her activities. But this was directly relevant to their case. Who, then? She finally typed. The response came immediately. Blackwater Holdings, offshore company, significant political interests in redevelopment zone. Aretha's mind raced. Blackwater Holdings wasn't mentioned in any of the case files. If they were the real power behind the development project, that changed everything. Proof? She asked. Check property records, Bermuda registry, follow the money. Aretha was already opening her laptop. Why are you telling me this? There was a long pause before the reply appeared. Consider it a test. For both of you. No further messages came despite her follow-up questions. Typical Reese, providing just enough information to set things in motion while remaining inscrutable about his own motivations. By morning, Aretha had compiled evidence confirming Reese's tip. Blackwater Holdings owned 67% of Westridge Development through a complex web of shell companies. More importantly, Blackwater had recently purchased adjacent properties, suggesting a larger redevelopment plan than what had been publicly disclosed. She arrived at the courthouse early, finding Elam pacing outside with a coffee in each hand. You look terrible, he observed, handing her one of the cups. Thanks for the confidence boost. Aretha accepted the coffee gratefully. And thanks for this. Least I could do. You were still sending me revised drafts at 3 a.m. He studied her face. Did you sleep at all? Sleep is overrated, she replied, then pulled him aside to a quiet corner. I found something big. Elam listened intently as she explained about Blackwater Holdings, his expression growing increasingly focused. How did you find this? He asked when she finished. Aretha had prepared for this question. I got curious about the property records, started digging into corporate registries. At 2 a.m.? I told you, I'm a fast learner. She held his gaze. The point is, this changes our strategy. The settlement meeting isn't with the real decision makers. It's a distraction. Elam processed this, strategic gears visibly turning. You're right, but we can use this. His eyes brightened with the first genuine hope she'd seen in weeks. If Blackwater is hiding their involvement, there must be a reason. Something they don't want public. Political connections, Aretha suggested. The mayor's been pushing urban renewal initiatives in that exact neighborhood. And the mayor's brother-in-law sits on the zoning commission, Elam added, the pieces connecting rapidly. This isn't just about tenant rights anymore. It's about corruption. The settlement meeting took on an entirely different tenor with this new information. Instead of desperate defendants facing inevitable defeat, Elam and Aretha entered the conference room with quiet confidence. 3 attorneys from Jensen and Marsh sat on one side of the polished table, alongside the Westridge Development CEO, a silver-haired man named Harrison Wells. Their expression suggested the meeting was a mere formality, a generous offer to resolve an unfortunate situation. Mr. Truitt, the lead attorney began smoothly, we appreciate you meeting with us today. Our client has prepared a generous relocation package for the tenants, including 3 months equivalent rent and moving assistance. Elam nodded politely. That's very thoughtful. Before we discuss specifics, I'd like to clarify who exactly is offering this settlement. The attorneys exchanged glances. Westridge Development, of course. Just Westridge? Elam's tone remained conversational. Not Blackwater Holdings? The reaction was subtle but unmistakable, a tightening around Wells' eyes, a slight stiffening of the lead attorney's posture. "I'm not familiar with that entity," Wells said carefully. "That's strange," Aretha interjected, sliding a folder across the table. "Because they own 67% of your company through various shell corporations." The lead attorney opened the folder, scanning its contents with practiced neutrality that failed to hide his surprise. "We've also noted," Elam continued, "that Blackwater has acquired neighboring properties through similar arrangements, suggesting a master development plan substantially larger than what's been presented to the Zoning Commission." Wells' face had gone from confident to ashen. "Where did you get this information?" "Public records," Aretha replied smoothly. "Offshore doesn't mean invisible, Mr. Wells." The lead attorney closed the folder with a sharp snap. "This meeting is to discuss settlement terms, not corporate structure." "The corporate structure is relevant," Elam countered, "particularly when it suggests potential ethics violations involving city officials." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Are you implying something, Mr. Truitt?" the attorney asked coldly. "Not implying, investigating." Elam leaned forward. "Here's our counteroffer. Westridge, or rather, Blackwater, provides fair market value compensation to all residents, plus relocation costs and emotional distress damages. In exchange, we don't file our motion requesting a full investigation into the relationship between Blackwater Holdings and certain members of the Zoning Commission." Wells stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. You're making accusations without evidence." "Actually," Aretha intervened, "we have documentation of 6 meetings between Blackwater representatives and Commissioner Gregory Phillips, the mayor's brother-in-law, none of which appear in official records." Another calculated gamble based on Reese's information. The silence that followed confirmed their suspicions. "We'll need to consult with our client," the lead attorney finally said, his composure cracking slightly. "Of course," Elam agreed pleasantly. "We'll expect your response by Monday. After that, we'll be amending our filing to include these new concerns." Outside the courthouse, Elam's professional demeanor dissolved into barely contained excitement. That was... He searched for words. Incredible. "Did you see their faces when you mentioned the meetings with Phillips?" Aretha smiled, ignoring the twist of guilt in her stomach. The meetings had been a calculated guess, though clearly accurate based on their reactions. "We're not out of the woods," she cautioned. "They might decide to fight anyway." "They won't," Elam was certain. "Corruption investigations scare developers more than lawsuits. The settlement will come." He was right. On Monday morning, a new offer arrived. Full fair market value for each unit, generous relocation packages, and a year's rent in comparable housing. The residents, many of whom had been preparing for eviction, were overwhelmed by the victory. As Elam explained the terms to a tearful Mrs. Lopez, one of the elderly residents who had become the face of their case, Aretha watched from across the room. The victory was sweet, the justice real, but the means left a bitter aftertaste. That evening, as they celebrated with cheap champagne in plastic cups, Elam studied her contemplatively. "We won because of your research," he said. "That information about Blackwater changed everything." Aretha nodded, avoiding his gaze. "Just doing my part." "The thing is," Elam continued, swirling the champagne in his cup, "I've been practicing law for 3 years. Chapter 8, Fabricated Narratives. The Westridge victory catapulted Elam Truitt from obscure legal aid attorney to minor local celebrity. News outlets picked up the David versus Goliath story, painting Elam as a crusading hero fighting for the underdog. Most stories mentioned his talented pre-law assistant in passing, which suited Aretha perfectly. She preferred working from the shadows. With the settlement funds secured in escrow, their tiny office above the laundromat transformed into a hub of activity. Residents came daily for assistance with housing searches, paperwork, and the logistics of relocation. Elam handled each interaction with the same earnest dedication, never rushing even the most mundane concerns. "You're good at this," Aretha observed one evening as they locked up, the last client having just left. "The human part of law. Most attorneys I've met care more about billable hours than actual people." Elam shrugged, but she caught the pleased flush on his neck. "The law exists to serve people, not the other way around. At least that's how it should work." "Is that what they taught you at state law?" He laughed. "God, no. They taught me how to bill clients and navigate corporate hierarchies. This..." He gestured toward the cluttered office where they'd spent the day helping families. "This I had to learn on my own." In the weeks following the settlement, their professional partnership deepened into something more personal. Late nights poring over case files led to takeout dinners and conversations that drifted beyond legal strategy. Aretha found herself sharing stories about her childhood, carefully edited versions that omitted Victor's worst offenses and Reese's intervention, while Elam spoke of his working-class upbringing in a small factory town. "First in my family to finish college," he told her one night as they walked to the subway after work. "My father spent 30 years on an assembly line so I could go to law school. He wanted me to make partner at some big firm, buy a house in the suburbs." "He must be disappointed," Aretha said, thinking of Elam's modest practice and barely livable salary. "Actually, no." A genuine smile crossed his face. "After the Westridge case, I took him to meet Mrs. Lopez and some of the other residents. He saw what the settlement meant to them. Dad was a union man. He understands fighting for the little guy. The rising media attention brought new clients, tenants fighting eviction, workers facing wrongful termination, families battling insurance companies. Elam took on as many pro bono cases as he could afford to, supplementing with paying clients who'd heard about his integrity and determination. It also brought scrutiny. One morning, Aretha arrived at the office to find Elam staring at his laptop, his expression thunderous. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down the coffee she'd brought. Wordlessly, he turned the screen toward her. On it was a local news site with the headline, "Hero Attorney's Secret Past. Elam Truitt's Questionable Ethics at Brenner and Whitman." The article detailed Elam's role in the shopping mall development he'd confided to Aretha about, the case involving Mrs. Castillo, the elderly woman whose eviction he'd expedited and who had died shortly after. But the story twisted the facts, portraying Elam as callously ambitious, using the woman's vulnerability to advance his career. It quoted anonymous colleagues describing him as opportunistic, suggesting his current pro bono work was merely image rehabilitation. "This is garbage," Aretha said flatly, anger rising as she read. "Who published this?" "City Chronicle." Elam's voice was tight. "Owned by MediaCorp." "Which is owned by?" "Take a guess." Aretha didn't need to. She knew exactly who controlled MediaCorp. The same man who owned Blackwater Holdings, who funded Westridge Development, who had been watching her progress with Elam from the shadows. Philip Reese. "It's character assassination," Elam said, closing the laptop. "But the worst part is, there's enough truth in it to sting. I did work that case. I did find the loophole that expedited her eviction. But you regretted it. You changed your entire career because of it. Doesn't matter. In the public eye, I'm either a hypocrite or an opportunist." He rubbed his face wearily. "This will affect our cases, our clients' trust." Aretha's phone buzzed in her pocket, a text notification she deliberately ignored. Later, she knew it would contain some cryptic message from Reese, some justification for this attack disguised as a lesson. We fight back, she said firmly. Not with denials, but with facts. You've helped dozens of families since leaving corporate law. We gather testimonials. Show your actual record. Elam shook his head. The damage is done. News moves fast, and most people won't follow up on the correction. Then we make them follow up. An idea was forming in Aretha's mind. We hold a press conference, invite the families from Westridge, your other clients. Let people see who you really fight for. Before Elam could respond, his phone rang. He checked the display, his expression growing even darker. Jensen and Mosh, he muttered before answering. Truitt speaking. Aretha watched as he listened, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, cold anger. That's absurd, he finally said. Your client has no grounds for such claims. No, I will not consider my position. File whatever you want. It's baseless intimidation, and we both know it. He ended the call, setting the phone down with deliberate control. What now? Aretha asked. Westridge is claiming breach of settlement terms. They're alleging I disclosed confidential information to other tenant groups fighting similar developments. That's ridiculous. We've been careful. They don't need to prove it, Elam cut in. They just need to file the motion and trigger a professional ethics investigation. Between that and this news story, he gestured to the laptop. They're trying to destroy your credibility, Aretha realized. Make an example of you to other attorneys who might challenge development projects. It's working, Elam admitted. 3 clients have already called to postpone our meetings. The systematic nature of the attack was unmistakable. The news story undermining public trust, the legal challenge threatening professional standing. Next would come financial pressure, perhaps an audit, or sudden issues with their office lease. It was elegant, ruthless, and exactly what she would expect from Philip Reese. That night, alone in her apartment while her mother slept, Aretha finally checked the text she'd been ignoring all day. Lesson 2. The system protects itself. Truth is irrelevant against power. PR. Fury rose in her like a physical force. She typed back with shaking fingers. Is this how you test us? By destroying him? The response came immediately. Not destroying. Educating. How he responds defines him. How you respond defines you. He's a good man trying to help people. He doesn't deserve this. Deserve is irrelevant. This is reality. The powerful don't surrender without consequences. Aretha paced her small bedroom, torn between rage and helplessness. She could tell Elam the truth, that she knew who was behind this, that she had an unexpected connection to the man orchestrating his downfall. But that would mean revealing her own deception, the source of her research that had won them the Westridge case. What do you want? She finally texted. The reply took longer this time. To prepare you for the real battles ahead, sentiment is a luxury. Justice requires ruthlessness equal to the opposition. You're wrong. Elam achieves justice through integrity, not manipulation. And where has his integrity led him? An ethics investigation, public humiliation, client exodus. Ask yourself, what good is moral victory if you lack the power to protect those who depend on you? The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Hadn't she made her own compromise using Reese's information without revealing its source? Hadn't she justified it as necessary for the greater good? She didn't respond to the text, but neither could she sleep. By morning, she had made her decision. Elam was already at the office when she arrived, looking as though he hadn't slept either. 3 more cancellation messages blinked on the answering machine. I've been thinking, he said without preamble. Maybe we should postpone taking new cases until this blows over. No. Aretha set down her bag firmly. That's exactly what they want. Aretha, I have a plan. She took a deep breath. But first I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you months ago. Elam's expression grew wary. Okay. Aretha sat across from him, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The information about Blackwater Holdings, I didn't find it through public records research. It was given to me. By whom? Philip Reese. Elam blinked, confusion evident. The developer? Why would he give you information against his own subsidiary? Because he's testing us. Both of us. Aretha met his gaze steadily. I know Reese. I've known him for over 2 years. He's the one funding my education. The silence that followed was deafening. Elam stared at her, processing this revelation, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning comprehension, and finally to something approaching betrayal. You've been what? Spying on me? Reporting back to him? No. Aretha leaned forward urgently. I've never reported anything. He watches, somehow. Knows what cases we're working on. Sends cryptic texts occasionally. I've mostly ignored them. Mostly? The Blackwater information was the only time I used what he sent, she admitted. It was true, and it helped our clients. Elam stood, pacing the small office. Why would Philip Reese fund your education? Why would he care about a pre-law student or a small-time attorney like me? This was the moment Aretha had dreaded, the full truth, or as much of it as she could bear to share. 2 years ago, my stepfather owed Reese money from gambling debts. A lot of money. She swallowed hard. He offered me as payment. Elam froze, shock replacing anger on his face. Jesus, Aretha. Reese accepted the offer, had me brought to his penthouse. The memories surfaced unwillingly, the elevator ride, the knife in her pocket, the fear and defiance. But he didn't. Nothing happened. Instead, he offered to fund my education, to help my mother get medical care. Why? I've asked myself that for 2 years. Aretha shook her head. Maybe atonement for past sins. Maybe amusement at playing God with people's lives. I don't know for certain. Elam sank back into his chair, processing. And now he's targeting me. Because of you. Because you're teaching me something he can't, that the law can serve justice without becoming corrupt. Aretha leaned forward. Elam, I think he's testing both of us, seeing if you'll compromise your principles under pressure, if I'll abandon them for expediency. This is insane, Elam muttered. We're talking about one of the most powerful men in the city treating people's lives like some twisted chess game. Yes, Aretha agreed simply. And right now, he's winning. Elam studied her face, his own expression unreadable. Why tell me this now? Because we can't fight what we don't understand. Aretha straightened her shoulders. And because I'm tired of lies, his and mine. She expected anger, felt she deserved it. Instead, after a long moment, Elam nodded slowly. So what's your plan? He asked. Relief flooded through her. We fight back, not just against the specific allegations, but against the whole corrupt system. We file a countersuit against Westridge for breach of good faith. We document the connection between MediaCorp and Blackwater. We expose the pattern. That's not a fight we can win, Elam warned. It's career suicide, for real this time. Maybe, Aretha acknowledged. Or maybe it's exactly the fight we're meant to have. Elam considered this, his legal mind visibly assessing angles and consequences. Finally, a slow, determined smile spread across his face. You know what? Let's do it. If I'm going down, might as well make it spectacular. As they began outlining their counter-offensive, Aretha's phone buzzed with another text. She checked it, somehow not surprised by its content. Lesson 3 begins. Choose your weapon wisely. PR. This time, she didn't respond. The game was changing, the stakes escalating. Reese had created fabricated narratives to test them, but now they would create their own, one built on truth, justice, and the courage to stand against power, regardless of the cost. The real battle was just beginning. Chapter 9. Betrayal and Redemption. Elam and Aretha launched their counteroffensive swiftly, filing motions against the breach allegations and initiating an investigation into MediaCorp's connections to Westridge Development. Their bold actions caught the attention of Melissa Chen, a reporter at Reese's rival newspaper, the City Tribune. "She wants to interview us," Elam told Aretha. "This could expose Reese's entire operation." That night, an unexpected visitor arrived at Aretha's apartment, Victor. Clean-shaven and well-dressed, he revealed he now worked for Reese. "Mr. Reese has a message," Victor said smugly. "Cancel the interview or lose it all. The education funding, the medical care for your mother." He handed her an envelope. "Also, Reese has evidence of serious ethics violations from Truitt's past. Call off the interview by morning or he releases everything." After Victor left, Aretha examined the documents, then called Elam. They met at a diner where he confirmed the worst. "It's mostly true," he admitted. "The Castillo case wasn't the only one where I bent ethics. There were others." As they weighed their impossible choice, Elam received a call from Melissa Chen. "She wants to move the interview up to tonight, says they already have corroborating information about Westridge." Simultaneously, Aretha received a text from an unknown number. "Don't trust Victor. Evidence doctored. Check original dates." When Chen arrived, Aretha took a gamble. "Before we start, I need to show you something." She handed over Victor's envelope. "We believe these documents may be altered. We'd like your paper to verify their authenticity." Chen's eyes lit up. "If someone's falsifying evidence to intimidate attorneys, that's a bigger story than we thought." The interview shifted focus to the pattern of corporate intimidation tactics. Chen revealed her team had tracked similar situations across 6 different development projects. "This runs deeper than we initially thought," Chen said. "My editor wants to expand it into a series." Later, another text arrived from the unknown ally. "Evidence confirmed, doctored. Original documents being sent to Tribune anonymously. Protect your mother." That night, Aretha finally told her mother the full truth about Victor's betrayal 2 years ago and their current situation. Instead of agreeing to hide at Elam's parents' home upstate, Clarice surprised her. "I won't hide," she said firmly. "If you're fighting, I'm staying right here. It's time I stopped being afraid." When Reese texted demanding her decision, Aretha replied simply, "Game change. Your move." The next morning, the Tribune's headline blared, "Paper Empire: How Philip Reese Controls the News That Reports on His Business Dealings." By evening, the state bar was investigating Jensen and Marsh. As darkness fell, Aretha received a final message. "My office, tomorrow, 9 a.m. Come alone. PR." The confrontation she'd been preparing for since that fateful night was finally at hand. Chapter 10. The Reckoning. Reese Enterprise Tower loomed above the city like a monument to wealth and power. Aretha steeled herself as the executive elevator whisked her to the 65th floor, opening directly into Philip Reese's vast office. "Ms. Franklin," Reese said, standing at the window overlooking his domain. "Your response to my challenge was unexpected. Most would have surrendered when faced with such threats." "I'm not most people," Aretha replied, taking a seat in the offered chair. "No, you certainly aren't." Reese studied her with calculated interest. "The Tribune article was quite thorough. My PR team is working overtime." "Why did you summon me here?" "To offer you a choice." Reese placed a folder on the table between them. "Option 1. I drop all actions against Truitt. Your education funding continues. Your mother's medical care remains secure. In exchange, you join my legal team after graduation." And Option 2. I destroy Truitt completely. Evidence far more damaging than what Victor showed you exists. I withdraw all financial support from you and your mother, and I ensure no law firm in this city will hire you after graduation." Aretha didn't flinch. "There's a third option you've overlooked." "Oh, I've already secured copies of every document connecting you to Media Corps, Westridge, and Blackwater. If anything happens to Elam, my mother, or me, those documents go to every news outlet and regulatory agency in the country." For the first time, Reese looked genuinely surprised. "You've learned well. I had a thorough teacher, albeit an unconventional one." A tense silence stretched between them until Reese unexpectedly smiled. "You were right, you know, when you suggested I'm not unified in purpose. The anonymous texts warning me about Victor. That was you, wasn't it?" Reese nodded. "Part of me wanted to see you succeed, to prove that integrity could prevail against power." "Why? What am I to you?" Reese's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "A reminder of who I might have been had I made different choices." He stood, walking to a small safe hidden behind a painting. From it, he removed the familiar wooden box containing his mother's pearl necklace. "My mother wore these the night my father gambled away our home," he said quietly. "She worked herself to death trying to provide for me. I swore I'd never be powerless again." "So you became like the men you hated," Aretha observed. "Yes." The simple admission hung in the air. "But perhaps it's not too late for you." He closed the box. "Here's my final offer. I will cease all actions against Truett. Your funding continues, no strings attached. In return, I ask only that you remember this conversation when you hold power of your own someday." Aretha considered his words carefully. "And if I refuse?" "Then we remain adversaries," Reese shrugged. "Though I suspect that would be a waste of both our talents." "Why would you concede so easily?" "Because you've proven yourself worthy of respect." Reese extended his hand. "Do we have an agreement?" Aretha stood, meeting his gaze directly. "We do. But know this. I'll be watching your companies closely. Any return to these tactics and we'll finish what we started." As they shook hands, Aretha felt the strange weight of history shifting. 2 years ago, she'd entered this man's world as a commodity to be traded. Today, she left as an equal. In the elevator descending to the lobby, her phone chimed with a message from Elam. "You okay?" She smiled, typing back, "Better than okay." "We won." The real victory, Aretha realized, wasn't just in the concessions she'd secured, but in the woman she had become. Someone who could face even Philip Reese without fear, who could protect those she cared about, who understood that true power came not from wealth or control, but from unwavering principle. She stepped into the sunlight, ready for whatever came next. Chapter 11. Empire Falls. The weeks following Aretha's confrontation with Reese brought swift, dramatic changes. The Tribune's expose expanded into a 5-part investigative series, triggering regulatory investigations into Reese's business practices. While Reese honored his agreement with Aretha, leaving Elam and her family untouched, his empire faced unprecedented scrutiny. The State Attorney General's office is investigating Blackwater Holdings, Elam announced one morning, dropping a newspaper on their office desk. Securities violations, tax evasion, potential bribery of public officials. "Will they find anything?" Aretha asked, knowing how meticulously Reese covered his tracks. "They already have." An anonymous source provided documentation of offshore accounts tied to Commissioner Phillips. Elam's eyes gleamed. "Our mystery ally is still at work." Aretha said nothing, suspecting the informant was Reese himself, strategically sacrificing certain chess pieces to protect his core assets and his agreement with her. The law practice flourished in the wake of the Westridge victory. New clients appeared daily. many facing similar corporate intimidation tactics. Elam hired 2 paralegals to handle the increased workload, moving the office to a modest but respectable space downtown. Through it all, Aretha continued her studies, maintaining her perfect GPA while working part-time with Elam. The professional partnership had deepened into something more personal. Tentative at first, both wary of complicating the working relationship, but increasingly undeniable. "We should talk about this," Elam said one night as they worked late, the tension between them palpable. "About what?" Aretha asked, though she knew perfectly well. "This," he gestured between them. "Us. Whatever's happening here." Aretha set down her pen. "Complicated, isn't it? I'm still your student, technically, and my colleague, and the woman who saved my career." His expression softened. "And someone I think about far too much for professional comfort." Before she could respond, her phone rang, her mother's ringtone. Aretha answered immediately, her smile fading as she listened. "What? When?" She stood abruptly. "I'm coming right now. Lock the doors, don't let anyone in." Elam was already grabbing his coat. "What happened?" "Victor showed up at our apartment. Threatened my mother." Aretha's voice was ice. "Said Reese couldn't protect us anymore." They rushed to Aretha's apartment, finding Clarice shaken but unharmed. Victor had appeared drunk, ranting about Reese abandoning loyal people while taking care of traitors. "He said Reese was finished," Clarice explained, hands trembling around her teacup. "That everyone who'd sided with him would go down too." Aretha's phone buzzed with a news alert. "Breaking. Philip Reese hospitalized after apparent heart attack." "That explains it," Elam murmured, reading over her shoulder. "With Reese down, the protections he promised might be compromised." Victor wasn't making idle threats, Aretha realized. He was warning us we're vulnerable now. That night, as Elam slept on the couch as protection, Aretha received a text from a hospital phone number. "Contingency activated. Stay vigilant. Assistance forthcoming." PR. Even from a hospital bed, Reese was still playing chess moves ahead of everyone else. The assistance arrived the next morning in the form of Reese's security chief, appearing at the door with 3 other men. "Ms. Franklin," he said formally, "Mr. Reese instructed us to ensure the safety of you and your mother until matters stabilize." "What matters exactly?" Aretha demanded. "Power struggles within the organization," the security chief replied cryptically. "Certain elements see Mr. Reese's medical condition as an opportunity, Victor Chambers among them." Elam stepped forward. "We're supposed to trust Reese's security team." "You have little choice," the man said bluntly. "Victor has assembled former associates with grudges against both Mr. Reese and Ms. Franklin. They don't know this location yet, but that won't last." As if confirming his words, Aretha's phone chimed with another news alert. "Reese executive found dead in apparent suicide, corporate scandal informant." The informant, almost certainly the source who had aided them against Westridge. Without Reese's protection, those loyal to him were being systematically eliminated. "We need to move you now," the security chief insisted. "Safe house is prepared. We leave in 5 minutes." "I'm not running," Aretha said firmly. "That's exactly what Victor wants, to make me feel powerless again." "Aretha," Elam warned, "this isn't about ego. These people are dangerous." "It's not ego, it's strategy." Her mind raced, forming a plan. Does Reese keep contingency files, evidence against people like Victor in case they ever turned against him? The security chief's expression revealed nothing. "I'm not at liberty to discuss. Yes or no? Lives depend on it." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded once. "Yes. I need those files. All of them. Specifically anything involving Victor." "Ms. Franklin, tell Reese it's time to play the final move." Aretha's voice was steel. He'll understand. While the security team made a call, Elam pulled Aretha aside. What are you planning? Victor thinks without Reese I'm defenseless. He's wrong. Her eyes flashed with determination. We'll use the law as our weapon. 6 hours later, armed with Reese's meticulously compiled evidence of Victor's criminal activities spanning 20 years, they walked into the district attorney's office. By evening, arrest warrants had been issued for Victor and 4 associates on charges ranging from extortion to attempted murder. As news broke of Victor's dramatic arrest, Aretha received a final text from Reese's hospital room. Checkmate. You've learned well. The empire was falling, but from its ruins, something new was emerging. A chance for justice, for redemption, for a future built on principle rather than power. And Aretha Franklin, once offered as collateral in a devil's bargain, had become the architect of her own destiny. Chapter 12. Justice and Love Triumphant. 3 months after Victor's arrest, the courthouse buzzed with tension as he was led in for sentencing, his once confident demeanor replaced by defeated resignation. The trial had been swift but thorough, damning evidence, failed plea bargains, and finally, a guilty verdict on all charges. Aretha sat in the gallery beside her mother and Elam, her face composed despite the emotional storm within. This man had nearly sold her, had threatened her mother, had tried to reclaim control over their lives. Now he would face judgment. The defendant will rise, the judge instructed. Victor stood, his eyes finding Aretha's in the crowd. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. Victor Chambers, you have been found guilty of extortion, assault, criminal threatening, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping, the judge stated. Your actions show a pattern of predatory behavior spanning decades. This court sentences you to 25 years in state prison. As the gavel struck, finalizing the sentence, Aretha felt no triumph, no vindication, only a quiet sense of closure. Victor's power over her life was finally, irrevocably broken. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around Elam, who had served as a special advisor to the prosecution. Aretha slipped away from the crowd, finding a quiet bench in the courthouse garden where Philip Reese sat waiting. His appearance had changed dramatically since his heart attack, thinner, grayer, but somehow lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. Congratulations, Miss Franklin, he said as she joined him. You kept your promise. Justice has been served. Not just for me, for everyone he hurt. Aretha studied the man who had so profoundly altered her life's course. How are you recovering? Physically, adequately, my business empire. A wry smile crossed his face. Less so. Investigations continue. Several subsidiaries have been sold. My board of directors has suggested I focus on my health. You seem surprisingly unbothered by that. Perhaps near-death experiences change one's priorities. Reese's gaze drifted to where Elam stood speaking to reporters. You've chosen well. He has integrity. Yes, Aretha agreed simply. He does. I've ensured your educational trust will continue regardless of my company's fate, Reese said. Your law school acceptance came through, I understand. Congratulations. Thank you. Aretha hesitated, then asked the question that had haunted her for years. That night when Victor brought me to you, why did you help me instead of using me? Reese was quiet for a moment. Because I saw someone who refused to be broken by circumstances beyond control. I saw someone who might succeed where I had failed, maintaining principles while gaining power. And have I? Magnificently. His smile held genuine admiration. You turned my lessons against me, used my own tactics to achieve justice rather than dominance. That's a rare gift. He stood, leaning on a cane. I must go. My days of pulling strings from the shadows are ending. The next chapter belongs to people like you and Mr. Truitt. Reese, Aretha called as he turned to leave. Despite everything, thank you. He nodded once, understanding all she couldn't say, then walked slowly away, a titan in decline, but perhaps finding redemption in his fall. Elam found her moments later, his face flushed with victory and something more personal. There you are. The reporters want a statement from the woman who brought down Victor Chambers. Let them wait, Aretha said, making room on the bench. I need a moment. Elam sat beside her, shoulders touching. It's really over. This phase is. She turned to face him. But I think the next could be even better. Law school for you, expanding the practice for me, fighting corporate corruption together. His smile brightened. Sounds promising. That's not all I meant, Aretha said softly. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Aretha Franklin, are you proposing what I think you're proposing? That we stop pretending we're just colleagues? Yes, I believe I am. The kiss that followed was gentle but filled with promise, of healing, of partnership, of a future defined by choices rather than past trauma. The courthouse steps were crowded with media when they emerged together. Clarice waited for them nearby, her face radiant with pride and newfound strength. Ready to make a statement? Elam asked, gesturing toward the reporters. Aretha squeezed his hand, drawing strength and giving it in return. Yes, I think I'm ready for whatever comes next. As cameras flashed around them, Aretha Franklin stepped forward to tell her story, not as a victim, but as a champion of justice. The girl who had once declared, "I am not a prostitute, I was forced by my father to do this," had transformed that moment of vulnerability into a lifetime of purpose. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Aretha and Elam stood beneath a canopy of golden leaves, exchanging vows before closest friends and family. Her mother, healthier and happier than she'd been in decades, beamed from the front row. Even Reese had sent a gift, his mother's pearl necklace with a simple note, "For a woman of true value." As they were pronounced husband and wife, Aretha reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. From that terrifying night in Reese's penthouse to this moment of pure joy. She had faced the darkest aspects of human nature and emerged not just unbroken, but strengthened. "What are you thinking?" Elam whispered as they shared their first dance as a married couple. Aretha smiled up at him, her heart full. That sometimes the most damaged beginnings can lead to beautiful outcomes. His arms tightened around her. "This isn't an ending, Aretha. It's just the beginning." And as they moved across the dance floor, witnessed by those who had supported their fight for justice, Aretha knew he was right. Their story, of love born from struggle, of justice rising from injustice, was just beginning. The shattered innocence of her past had forged an unbreakable strength that would serve them well in the battles still to come. Together, they would face whatever challenges arose, armed with the most powerful tools of all: truth, justice, and love. The end.